I'm gonna pretend to play the role of host here and say, welcome to the illustrious world premiere episode of the Alejo Communications podcast. I am, for some reason, your host, Ethan Sachs, and I am joined by Alejandro Rodriguez, our founder and CEO, and Therese Barbato, our talent and design lead. Welcome, folks.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Ethan.
Oh, yes, it is my pleasure. There's a sort of classic, start to any sort of podcast where you talk about where you came from, but I think we should probably start with what's happening now. What are we doing now? And then maybe we'll M. Night Shyamalan it and go from the beginning, and see where we came from. But what is the work that we're doing now, Alejandro?
Yeah. Well, we are doing leadership coaching through the performance training lens. So both Therese and I share a background in actor training. We were trained in the performing arts, and we got in about a little more than a decade ago, into the world of business communication. And we were able to sort of work in a freelance capacity for lots of really exciting companies doing creative work, helping folks develop leadership skills at different tiers or junctures of their journeys. And so we not only borrowed, but also created, and continue to generate ways in which our performance training can be brought really usefully to bear on helping people develop as leaders. And ultimately, what we're learning every day is just connect with one another. I would say what we're doing right now is we're helping people connect at the workplace.
Therese, you found your way to this work separately from Alejandro. You both came from the same place, found yourself to the same place, but different paths.
Yeah, a bit. I mean, it is interesting because we started in the same place, but not at the same time. And then we started working for the same consultancy, but not at the same time. So we were sort of like ships passing in a couple of different places, institutions. But when I first started doing this work, Alejandro was a little bit ahead of me. And so I was beginning, learning, sponging from getting to see him facilitate and getting to see him lead this kind of work and workshops and a bunch of different kinds of workspaces. So he, in some ways, for me, was like a guide star of like, he had come from where I had come from, so I knew we spoke the same language, but he had broken ground in these other rooms, bringing those skills we had to other places where you might not necessarily see them. So I got the great benefit of like learning from watching him chart that course, and then I sort of followed along behind him to do a similar thing.
And then very quickly, the student became the teacher.
So we're alluding to where you both came from, which is where?
We went to Julliard. I went as right out of high school. Therese had gotten her degree already elsewhere and came as a graduate student, but we both trained as actors at Julliard.
And was this kind of work as a funnel from acting? Was that out of a passion, out of a necessity? Obviously, currently it is a passion. Was it always that way? What is the progress, that track from, okay, I'm out of school, or maybe this even started in school, of where this interest in leadership development and communication skills, and especially using your robust theatrical training to support that?
I want to first say that I wonder if there are others who are with me in this process of kind of inventorying what our interests were when we were making those decisions, kind of choosing schools, choosing programs. Because the world of work has changed so radically, I wonder if there are many of us who are like, okay, what was I good at, shorn of like what jobs I thought I was going to get through it. Um, but what were the gifts that brought me to that decision point, and how do I manifest them or share them with the world? Considering that many of us, our industries have changed radically, or maybe they're currently changing. So I can speak for myself. I think I always was interested in theater, being shared more broadly from than just the people who bought tickets to go to see plays. Because I didn't grow up in a play going family. I've come from a family of immigrants. They do not have sort of a cultural habit of going to the box office and buying season tickets and, sitting in velvet seats while the lights go down. Like, so already I got into nonprofit leadership when I first moved to New York at 18. And the first venture was just taking theater to kids in classrooms, in communities where they didn't have access to arts education. So me and my friends built this nonprofit, Artists Striving to End Poverty. That's my teaching artist background. And so in some ways you can draw a direct line from even that Alejandro to this one, which is I'm still doing that work, taking theater to other contexts. Um, but I will also say there's been some recent learning as I talk about kind of inventorying those gifts and interests, which is only occurring to me very recently, that like what we did in theater training was really just try to connect behavior to impact, or another way of saying it, like behavior to story. We spent a lot of time thinking about like, if I lean at this moment on this line, it gives this story about the character. If I pause here, it gives this impression about the character. It makes me look upset or sad. Let's do that. Let's not do that. And I think I realize that the work that Therese and I do in the world and all of our coaches is just helping connect their behaviors to the stories that they're projecting and casting out, to the impact that those behaviors have, and having them connect those more intentionally. Essentially, how they write the play that they're a part of more thoughtfully and more deliberately. So that's another connection, but that one is a little more fresh.
Yeah, I was chronically dissatisfied by the limitations of acting. Even when I was doing it professionally, it always felt like not enough. I loved it. I thought it was really interesting. I think the core of what I've always done is like pursuit of truth, and that's at the core of theater, and that's at the core of communicating honestly, and like the thread that has woven through my life is the same thing, which is pursuit of truth. But from a very young age, I felt like acting in and of itself was not a full meal for me. That said, when I started doing this work, it was absolutely a money job. I mean, I was like, I want to pursue acting, and I think this other thing might help me do that. And I remember the very first communication gig that I did with a consultancy that Alejandro and I used to work with, winging it intensely, trying to help people through a difficult conversation based solely on like my instincts and my acting training, and immediately feeling impact, like immediately feeling someone go like, "Oh, oh, I never thought about that. I think I might try that at home with my wife tonight." Like I just did 10 seconds of work and I could immediately feel that there was impact. And I had done a lifetime of work in the theater and probably never had that sense of direct impact. So yeah, I would say like there was always a sense for me that I wanted to do more with the raw ingredients that I had. But it was a little bit of like a backdoor. Like I didn't set out to do this work because of that. I just sort of found my way into it and then realized, oh, actually, like my skills and my interests are much better suited here to do more good for more people. And that becomes like exciting and generative in a different way.
Was there as much of a sort of like light bulb aha moment for you, Ale, in that? It sounds like for Therese, it was immediately apparent. For you, was it more of a slower burn?
No, I mean, I think the big aha was about taking it to adults at work. I think I think in my 20s when I started doing the nonprofit work for A Step, it was immediate, the veil falling of like, oh, this is good for people, and everyone should have a little improvisation training. Everyone should have a little public speaking, presentation skills training. Everyone should know the power of creating like a rehearsal space for yourself to practice something difficult. Like even working with 6-year-olds, 12-year-old, like in the most vulnerable context, people who you would think it's going to be really hard to reach them. It was just like, oh, this stuff works to use play as a modality for learning. um, to tap into the imagination, to look at questions of like listening and speaking. Um, so it was immediate for me too. I think the aha, or the thing that took me a little longer to realize, was like, oh no, grown adults need it too. And actually really successful high level professionals also benefit from it, not just kids in classrooms in, the Bronx or New Orleans or wherever we were.
I really appreciated the anecdote that the Therese gave of like even someone saying like, oh, I might even take this work that we're doing here and take it home. Like, I feel like even in my whatever few short months so far with the company, I've heard about the impact, and that you like the immediate impact that you see. I'd love to hear some more about like if there are other sort of specifics like that. They don't have to be specific anecdotes, but just things that make you go, this is clearly helpful for someone. I mean, it can be from something that we're currently working on with a client or a customer. But I'd love to hear how that you see that impact firsthand.
I can hit it. The thing, like when you just asked that question, the film that played in my brain from over a decade of sitting down with people and practicing difficult conversations is over and over and over and over again the human desire to keep talking. Like I would say like 75% of the time that you're practicing with someone, the first thing you have to do is ask them to stop, to pause, to ask a question. Like the revelation around how much am I talking and how much am I listening. I think it's something that most folks have never considered inventorying, and they certainly have never had a physical experience of clocking how much am I talking, how much am I listening. And so those aha moments are like through the history of my work. It's like almost every time, and with a lot of frequency, and with a lot of people going gleefully like, I did it again, right? Like coming into an awareness of what dialogue actually means, and what it actually means to let someone else in, and to pause yourself from talking, that you're not entirely responsible for the dialogue, that you actually need to offer up an invitation to get somebody in the dance. Like that happens over and over and over again, and happens, I have to say, like beautifully. Like almost every time I've been like, hold on, pause, stop right there, stop. People are like, oh yeah, like they want to learn to stop, and they want to learn to listen, but they never, to Ali's point earlier, they never get reps at practicing. No one in real life is ever like, stop, ask a question, but they're gleeful in getting some muscle memory around like going to the gym to figure out how to like break that habit, that
And
very, very deeply human habit.
And I don't know if Therese, you're probably more humble about it, but the pride I take from that is I sort of walk away if they've been able to make that shift. Um, and I think I want to say you're welcome to all their future conversation partners. Like I'm like, all the people that you're going to talk to or downstream of this practice are going to get a little more room in your conversation. They're going to get a little bit more curiosity from you, and I mean, there's this great slide in the work from like the really sweeping, like when people talk about mindset shifts, like folks saying like, I am actively pausing to think about what the other person may want or bring into a sort of critical conversation or a difficult conversation. That's obviously going to be a gift that keeps on giving. I'm sure Therese has heard lots of examples. We do in this work often hear people say, hey, I know that this was explicitly about working with my direct reports or with my peers, but I've brought it home. I'm having better conversations with my daughter, or I'm bringing this into my partnership. That's always, it's never sort of like front of where we were hired by companies to work on conversations in the workplace. But of course we understand this stuff ripples into every relationship of your life. And the most important ones are obviously oftentimes the ones you go home to. But from that end of like really meaningful kind of internal shifts to something as simple as a manager at a big tech company in the Bay Area, us coming back for a second engagement and me asking, how's it been going? And he says, well, there were 3 words that you taught us in the last session that I've made a habit. I can't say I've had a epic transformation, but I've started to use 3 words nearly in every meeting. And I said, what are those 3 words? And he said, tell me more. And he said, when I feel defensive, when I feel like I need to explain myself, I learned in your session to just say the 3 words, tell me more. And I get to emotionally regulate. I do a little self-regulation. That person gets to keep talking. I catch my breath. I get some more. And I thought, wow, that's 3 words of a takeaway. You would think that's not a lot, but actually I understand that was a huge shift that we were able to make possible. So there's a lot of examples like that, Ethan.
I use a phrase a lot called pass the mic, which is like, you don't need to be super highbrow about involving somebody else. Like, you just need to recognize you've been talking too long and pass the mic. Like, giving people things that they can remember, post-it notes in their mind that like they can easily harken back to, such that the behavior shift stays with them. The other thing I wanted to say, Ethan, when you were asking about aha moments that have happened, is that I've been a part of a lot of aha moments about the way in which people approach conversation. Like, so often when you're practicing with someone, they begin from a place of like, uh, forecasting, this is going to be a bad and gnarly conversation. And some of the coaching will be like, hey, what if we just begin by sort of like clearing the etch a sketch in your mind and approaching the conversation thinking this might end in a win-win for both of us. That's going to affect your language, your word choice, your body language, the way in which you communicate. Like, so some of the aha moments also just have to do with like framework and the manner whereby people think about these sorts of conversations, less to do with the content and more to do with that.
One of the phrases that I really like that you threw out there, Therese, is that it's like going to the gym. I know that a gym for leadership skills has been a phrase we've thrown around at the company over the past few months. And just to throw in a personal anecdote, I was in therapy the other day, and I was like really reflecting the day prior. I was like thinking about what I was going to talk to her about. And then I was like also planning to go to the gym the next day. And I was like, oh, I don't really plan. Like, I see a trainer and I plan my other 2 workouts. I see a therapist and I don't really plan to put into practice or to like, I'm going to dedicate 30 minutes on Tuesday and 30 minutes on Thursday to apply this in a conversation or apply this in an interaction with someone. And it was a light bulb moment that I had about how I think about what takes practice and what doesn't, or what I should be intentional about and what I shouldn't or can't be intentional about. And it feels so similar to the work that this company does, because it takes something that I think a lot of the aha moments that you might be seeing, and correct me if I'm wrong, are around people not even knowing that there are kinds of things they could be practicing or could be more mindful about. And so you're just sort of pulling back the veil on things they're around all the time, that then you're giving them the tools to say, here's how you can engage with this in a more mindful way.
Yes. And practices. I love that you brought that word, the idea of practice. I had a friend from another chapter of my life who that was their favorite question to ask in like a catch-up situation is, what are you practicing these days? Because it is different than like, what are you reading or what are you thinking about? There's probably a more select number of things that you can genuinely be practicing, and I think I'm getting better at this, but early on, I thought it was like I took for granted what Therese and I had spent most of our professional lives developing as something that was obvious. Like, of course you can slow down your speech, or of course you can make an adjustment to your posture if you want to show up and that these things have different impacts. But I'm increasingly realized that sharing really accessible, repeatable practices is revelatory because of what you're saying. Like, people don't recognize that you can make a shift that actually ends up making people read you completely different. Like, the feedback you get is, wow, something seems different. Wow, you really are. You've gotten a lot. We hear that all the time. People are saying, like, I'm a totally, and little do they know, all we did was work on getting you to punctuate your sentences and like stop at a period. Something as simple as, we do an exercise called clicks and claps, where you like click your pen when you get to the end of a thought. Click, like right there. It just teaches you that in speech, we often forget to punctuate the way we do with periods when we're writing, and we don't give people a chance to process the whole idea. They do that, they get better at it. It makes a total difference, and I sometimes feel like it was so simple. It was so there. Like you said, it was accessible. It was fruit on the tree, and you just needed some guidance to pluck it.
And I think that is the connection from what we trained in. Like, what acting training is just a constant addition to and refinement of a toolbox. Did you know your voice could do that? Did you know your shoulders could do that? Did you know you could be more intense or less intense? I mean, it's just a library of options around human behavior, such that you can build from that library any character or any story. And so I think in the wider world, like the revelation that Ali is talking about is like, unless you study drama, you never get exposed to that library at all. And so the idea that we can say like, oh, this is, you can modulate these things. Like, you don't have one speed. Actually, you have a lot of things at your disposal, and we'll like shine light on them and name them and actually show you what it feels to end your sentences this way, or to do a whole introduction where your shoulders are more open, or just show you what's possible such that you can start to play around with the tools of expression.
I want to zoom out a little bit from the work in particular and ask you, Ale, about your decision to strike out on your own. You know, you have over a decade of experience in this industry as a contractor for various companies. And I wonder what happened where you said, I want to do this for myself.
I felt the emotions swell immediately. Therese and Ethan know that I'm a crier. I cry a lot. And it's usually when something's coming from like a deep and soft place. But this is potentially for public consumption, so I'm gonna try to keep it together. It was related to risk and reward. It was me getting to the edges of what I thought was possible as a contractor for other companies, and feeling like I could have a life delivering, being a really sought after executor of these companies' content. And some of them are wonderful, wonderful companies doing great work in the world. And I felt like I got to kind of leadership or sort of lead facilitation, doing more client facing work, doing design work. I really was given a lot of, as much purview as I could in someone else's home. You know what I mean? Like, as much sovereignty, if you will. And I just thought I was super present to the risks of leaving, like going from being a house cat to being an alley cat. But I thought, I'm still young. I think that on the other side of this risk might be a surprising, maybe even like transformative amount of discovery and surprise and delight. Like, if I can do my own experiments, if I can tap into the people that I most admire, the people on this call as an example, like I not only raise the ceiling, I blow open. Yes, the floor gets a lot lower, but my God, the ceiling blows open, and now it's like sky's the limit, as they say. And so it took a few years for me to muster the courage, Ethan. I can't say that I was like, like ready to rock and I jumped off the cliff with great aplomb. No, I had to kind of rev my engine and make half steps, and then it's like jumping in a cold pool, like touch it with your toe and back off of it and then put your ankle in. but ultimately it just became untenable for me to not take the risk that might pay off in new forms of making positive impact, like ultimately new ways to be helpful to our neighbors. I thought I could maybe add something to this conversation, and I haven't looked back since.
And this could be a question for both of you. Having experience with other folks in the field, I'm not asking you to, throw anyone under the bus, obviously, but I am curious, do you have a sense of here's what is different about Alejo? Here's what is different about the work we're doing versus some other places?
We named something a few months ago, actually in conversation about like where we are in the AI landscape, like what it means to teach something so deeply human at a time when the whole world is becoming a machine. And the phrase that we landed on was doubling down on the human. What is different for me about every other consultancy that I've worked with in this space is that this company incorporates heart, like that there's real feeling and real passion, and like, dare I say, love, not in a way that we would get in trouble about in a court of law later, but like there's like authentic and genuine heart and care in it, that for me is singular about this consultancy as compared to others in the landscape.
Man, that's really nice to hear, because I certainly agree, and it's the sort of our North Star. The word I'd add to that, which is just a kind of cognate, like adjacent to that, is depth. I think there are a lot of players in the field who do a thing really well, and if you need that thing, they're a great like option to plug in and solve that specific solution. I think when you work with Alejo, and this presents challenges for our business model. I mean, it's not all just roses, but like if you engage Alejo, you are gonna get real, real humanity, real depth, and we are gonna always be interested in like underlying causes and really meaningful impacts, not just like, great, you gave us 3 metrics and we checked off those 3 boxes. But Therese and I are constantly talking about, how do we help people be in better relationships with one another? How do we make the work more meaningful and sustainable? And we know sometimes that's downstream of getting a manager to give more effective feedback, or getting us a VP to be a better storyteller in their board presentations. We do solve the business imperative. Like we're running a business. We address the practical need that brought us into the room. But with Alejo, we're also going to keep an eye on what are the roots of this thing, and how do we leave people in better relationship than when we found them.
You're starting to touch on a question that I have, which is the distinction between, or perhaps the marriage between communication skills and leadership training, leadership development. Because I think for some, the phrase communication skills might seem akin to Toastmasters and seem akin to some of the things that we've even sort of mentioned on this podcast, which is, just sort of some tricks of the trade, or some slight physical or vocal adjustments that can be made, which is important. But the well of leadership development it feels like maybe a rectangle and square kind of thing, where one encompasses the other, but the other one is so vast and much deeper. And I feel like that's where a lot of the passion lies when I speak to either of you about the work.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think you put your finger on one of the tricky parts of like going to market, if you will, is that I can tell you, I know the like 4 or 5 associations people have when I say I do communications training, right? They often think that I do public speaking skills, like I'm going to put them in an upright posture and tell them to project. Um, or they may think I do like compliance training, like anti-harassment training, or right. There's like 3 or 4 things that people go to, and you're exactly right. Therese and I sometimes initiate conversations with companies based on a need like that, right? We have people who are moving up in leadership and they don't have, for example, the necessary executive presence is a word that comes up often, or gravitas, or another version of it is, hey, we've promoted a lot of people to manager. We don't think that they have the toolbox yet of running effective meetings, giving useful feedback, coaching their team members. But the light that animates that work and that connects us to this broader landscape of leadership training and leadership development is that Therese and I are of a mind that leadership can be boiled down to like a web of relationships that you are in the midst of, and that there's reporting relationships, there's peer relationships, vendor relationships, customer client relationships, and that ultimately it all ends up about how we connect and move one another. And so if anything, I've started to veer away from just broadly saying communications training. I still use language around leadership development, but I'm really focused on leadership behaviors, and behaviors gives us the clearer impression that what we're talking about is how we use our voice, how we use our body, how we use our hand, how we use our stories, how we use questions, like scripts, characters, settings, all of those things that are like our trade, that connects us to the behaviors of leadership, which many of which fall under the realm of communication. Not all of which, but many of which, because it again, as I go back to it, it's about not managing, but harnessing relationships almost across the board. All leaders are doing that.
And I think the one step further I would go is that like leaders create the weather. I mean, I don't believe anything so much as I believe things are top down. The culture of the company is the culture of the leadership of that company, without exception, I think. And so framing this work as targeted toward leaders is the most direct hit to try to affect the weather, the culture, the health of the entire organism, whichever it is that we're working with.
Yeah, and it's cool because we have an offering that's for frontline contributors that don't have formal leadership roles. But what we do in that program is we approach it as, what are leadership behaviors that are accessible to you? You can lead from the middle, so if we look at leadership as a suite of behaviors, it's going to look different at different vantage points in the organization, but at no point in your journey are you excluded from those. Like, you can always tap into leadership behaviors if you can identify them and practice them and make them habit, which is where we come in.
So what's challenging about the work?
Ooh, wow, what a question.
You will come across a lot of people in leadership who are skeptical at best or completely dismissive at worst, that this kind of training is useful to them and valuable to them. And so then it becomes both the work of trying to actually help them and practice and name tools and convince, like, and kind of like find ways to make sure that it's clear why this would be helpful to them, and sort of like make a pitch or try to get your voice in. Or I don't know if this is probably something that we'll cut out, but often very senior leadership tends to be made up of old white men. So like,
Yeah.
um,
I don't think that's a secret. So
Yeah, cut out or not, it's the truth.
it's
Yeah.
not a secret. I'm trying to think of a way to say it that's not quite so glib and so dismissive.
They can handle it.
But
They can
actually,
handle it.
here's what I will say is that I think, let me see if I can put it this way. Alejandro and I were just talking about this yesterday. The qualities that make you interested in leadership and potentially capable of leadership are not always, it's not always considered that things like listening and vulnerability and flexibility, adaptability, building relationships in an omnidirectional way, it's not necessarily something folks buy into immediately that's going to help them as a leader. And so I think like there's a personality profile that pursues leadership that can sometimes be a bit at odds with the things that we believe actually make great leaders. And so there's like a incongruity that you come up against, and you come up against it in a number of different ways. Like resistance to what we do manifests in a ton of different fascinating, infuriating ways, and that's another podcast.
Well, yeah, I can give you an example, and I don't know if this is going to get more narrow or more broad, but um, you probably have gotten the impression that we think of our work as very relational, and part of what we're hoping to improve is relational health and relational satisfaction, um, and yet we're doing it. I think I'm not saying any surprises. We're doing it in a landscape that is built to be transactional. That's built to be about an exchange of fees for goods, and so that shows up in lots of ways. For example, we really love and I think do our best work in like ongoing longitudinal partnerships, and the clients that keep building with us are the ones that I think are getting the most of our genius, the most of our offerings, because we're sort of in that relational space. But as you can understand, there are changes of leadership, shifts in the budget, the economic landscape changes. Like we are trying to ride this ride with these partners, is what we really think of them. But ultimately, we're constantly faced with like, can you come in and do 90 minutes virtually? And it's like, yes, we definitely can, but we want to also be really clear about what you're going to get out of 90 minutes. Because if you're asking for behavioral change, and then you're saying, can you come in and do 90 minutes on Teams? I feel responsible to talk to you about what real behavioral change looks like and requires. And I'm getting more bold with clients because I don't want to sell them a bag of goods. I want to say, hey, we can start here, but let's look at getting the resources necessary to invest in actual behavioral change, because all growth is social at some point, and so we need to socialize. We need the people that these people work with and alongside to also be kind of proximal to it. Anyway, it's relational versus transactional. That tension, which we come up against in lots of different ways, is part of what we have to navigate, and it's tricky.
One other way I would put it is like the entire scope of what we do relies on growth mindset.
Oh
So
yeah.
growth mindset versus fixed mindset. And if you are working uh, in partnership with folks who also have growth mindset, which is at the base, the idea that you can change and you can improve. Um, if and when you're working with folks who have a more fixed mindset and feel like things sort of are the way they are and people sort of are the way they are, there's like a theological impasse there. Like, in order for the work to get done, there needs to be a modicum of growth mindset. That's also something we bump up against that's challenging.
To frame it as the positive, the other side of that is when we find a people leader, an HR decision maker at a company who is enterprising, creative, and has a growth mindset, we can make a ding in that organization's universe. Like, and I'm saying that I have the case studies to prove it. When we get that partner who has some decision making power and who wants to um, really, really move the needle with how people are communicating and connecting with another, we dig in, and that ends up being like the best platform. We change organizations positively. We have, I should say, and I know we will continue to.
The word vulnerability came up, Therese, when you were talking about things you butt up against, and I was not surprised to hear that. One of the things I was thinking is that I bet that one of the reasons communication skills or public speaking skills feels more comfortable for folks to engage with is that it's kind of surface level adjustments. You're not saying you're saying, well, if you just change this way, you're doing something, or this way you're presenting yourself. But beyond that is getting to the core of how things are being done and how folks are impacting or not impacting those around them. And that is a deeply personal thing. And that is a thing where you say, and again, something that as actors, you have to just let go of being precious. That's something that I think is, we haven't touched on, but that you both clearly bring to the work, is that you're familiar with taking notes. Like that's the work is taking notes in a personal way. Sure, the note can be about stand here or enter a line later or whatever, but beyond that, it's quite personal, and being able to meet people there and break through that has to be a challenge as well.
It's something that I can only speak for myself. I think this is true for Therese as well. Like we are all, we have different hardware and we accumulate different software. Like, I'm built, I'm built for that. I want to get close to the bone as fast as I can. And I've been that way since I was a kid. So like I, bring that into the rooms, and I obviously go at the pace, as they say, the speed of trust, and everyone's starting differently. But I will just say, to the point of vulnerability, I wish we would think about the idea of trust, which every leader will tell you about how trust is crucial. My team has to trust me. My clients have to trust me. I wish we would imagine that the vending machine of trust, that the coins we put into that vending machine are called risk, and that you don't get trust without putting in risk into the vending machine, because it is truly the ingredients of trust is you give a little bit to get a little bit. And there is actually no shortcut. You can't fake it. You can't get around it. You can't like game it or hack it. You input risk, you take a little risk, and as a reward, you get more trust. And so we're always trying to walk ourselves to that line and walk our coachees and our participants to the line of like, what can you offer that might net you that trust that you're looking for.
I also think that I just listened to this Brene Brown interview, and she named at one point, like, you have to have a tolerance for discomfort if you want to communicate well. And I would almost reframe vulnerability as like a tolerance for discomfort. Because the thing that you just brought up for me, Ethan, that I didn't mention is when you're in acting training and people are showing you that toolbox, it's a profoundly personal and uncomfortable experience. Like, it's not an easy thing to pick apart who you are and how you are and why you do the things you do. There's totally cost. Vulnerability is the price of admission to do that. And I think once you like pull that forward into people, regular people working in their workplaces, like the thing that I would say almost more than vulnerability is like, can we cultivate an appetite for discomfort, like discomfort within safety, but for that like that stretchy zone of learning discomfort, that's where change happens. That's where you can make a ding, actually. And I think like it is a necessary ingredient to something actually happening. If there's no vulnerability, if there's no discomfort, probably nothing has happened.
Yeah, and another challenge of our work, Ethan, is explaining that to folks who don't have that in their background, whose learning for them has been information transfer, a professor at the front of the classroom with a
A
deck,
slide deck.
a slide deck, and them taking notes. I grab at references, like if they've ever done dance training, if they've ever learned social dance, if they've ever done a sport, like I grab at reference points, like learning how to hit a baseball or whack a tennis ball with a racket or learn a salsa step. To try to, and then you hopefully see the connection of like, oh yeah, I had to be bad for a little while. You know what I mean? Or I had to let myself move through some embarrassment at the beginning, but man, I'm glad I did, just to try to get across what Therese just said.
I imagine, because I had a similar journey from learning about this company and this world to where I am now, of thinking that some things that I knew I've already brought up, like Toastmasters or communication skills. And then there's another sort of different end of the spectrum, which is like improv workshops that, so when you hear theater-based leadership skills training, you conjure an image that is like, okay, what can people with acting training offer me in my corporate setting? And you think of these kinds of extremes, whether it's just these physical touch-ups or whether it's icebreakery something. And what you both do is so much more thoughtful, but also so much like you're trying to put it into, have you ever like practiced hitting a baseball? You know, trying to put it into these buckets of, let me give you my one sentence elevator pitch that explains this work. But it's quite difficult to do unless without seeing it.
Yes. Welcome to my particular Dante's Inferno. Yeah. But I have a feeling. I have a feeling. First of all, I know that when as soon as you see it, you're like, oh, of course. Why would we have spent so much money on like L&D, the other variety? Like, oh yeah, this is what it takes to get people to act different. And also, I don't know if this is true, but I have a suspicion that as we become more atomized by technology and by the divisive currents of our current moment, that there will be like I don't know, a particular shaped hole in our center that is going to people are going to find clumsy ways to articulate it, but I've already started to hear people say, Ale, we're talking to you guys because we find our workforce is coming back to work and they've forgotten how to be with one another. People will say different things like, I'm terrible at small talk, or I've forgotten how to meet new people, or they might grab at a word like networking. Oh, I'm asked to do networking, but it all amounts to the fact that like those collisions sometimes, sometimes planned for, sometimes inadvertent. I think people are falling more and more out of practice with. And that helps us make our case more clearly, because in some ways it helps us say like, yes, that. And we'll look at it specifically through your role at work, maybe, but that's the thing we're going to help you with and that you can get better at, and you will get better after we work together.
This is what you're already saying, but that the need for this kind of work, the need for attention on relationship and communication is actually only becoming more dire. Like we're certainly moving into it's AI's world. We just live here. But the experience that folks are having, both coming out of COVID and moving into a world where machines can do a lot of people's jobs, like there will always still be live performance. People will always still need and want to connect. And so I think like as it relates to workplaces, the pain points around relationship, how people work together, how people communicate together, what's the human weather, like if the quality of your day is 8 or 10 hours in a workplace, that's a human experience,
Yeah.
like AI doesn't create the weather outside when you go to work, and so this, I think this work actually becomes increasingly important now.
And my hope is that as people feel that need grow, they will start to reach out with their own language around what they're missing and what they're looking for, and that we can meet them in the middle. Because I think, to your point, we're still searching for each other. We know we have this helpful offering, and we're out in the marketplace finding folks, explaining what we brought, hearing what they're looking for, and we're finding happy matches. But I think, as Therese was saying, as the gap grows and the need grows, because even if AI takes over 70% of a leader's responsibilities, the 30% only becomes more important. How they differentiate themselves when they walk into that room with that AI built deck or that AI powered chart or set of data. It only matters more who walks in that room and how they run that room. And I think we'll find each other more because folks will just have to kind of out of urgency start to define that need better, you know?
I feel like curiosity is something that is intrinsic to this work, not only in terms of how you enter rooms and engage with clients and customers, but even the three words that your Bay Area manager said of "tell me more" is not only a reset for oneself or an opportunity to, center oneself, but an opportunity to be curious.
That's right.
What are you both curious about currently? What's inspiring you currently?
There's like a candle that burns inside me that's just been like fuel has been added to it over several years. So Alejandro has heard me say versions of this, but many years ago I interviewed a nun for my podcast, and she told me she cited something that she had read about kinds of listening. And the first kind of listening is listening to interrupt. The second kind is listening to comprehend, and the third is listening to inspire. And the thing that I am most fascinated by and curious about in life is like how to do that thing. Like, how do you listen in such a way that it becomes a creative act, a generative act? And so along the way, that was probably 8 years ago that I heard that. And along the way, I just keep kind of like my curiosity gets piqued by things I'm hearing. I sent something to Alejandro yesterday, which was like this moment of profound silence in a podcast interview, like profound silence that then led the person being interviewed into a completely different room, completely different direction. I think there's something like incredibly powerful, both in the art of listening and in the behaviors, the ways in which people can activate that in order to get the best out of the other. And so there are rock stars in that world who really fire me up, one of whom is the therapist Orna Goralnik, who I've recently turned Alejandro onto, and many others, honestly. But like the thing that I'm fascinated by is like the art of listening to inspire and what that means and what that looks like and how one can do it. So I'm like a receptacle for anytime I hear it, anytime I see it. It's like my drug.
I would say, Ethan, that kind of a beautiful thing about this moment that this conversation is happening in is like after the first couple years, which I don't know if entrepreneurs listening to this will recognize, but like you have to move through the initial phases of imposter syndrome. Do I have a business? Is this helpful to people? Okay, then I have to kind of come up with the back end, like just make the infrastructure possible, and so it gets very narrow. Like for me, the first couple years were very like I had my blinders on because I was so focused on just establishing ourselves. And part of that work and the work that predated that was like finding out what the field was like, what these management theories that are kind of predominant are, reading the how to win friends and influence people, the Think and Grow Rich, the 1 Minute Manager. Like, okay, what is the background? Because I felt a need to kind of grow like some grounding in that. And now that we're sort of on the other side, and I can speak for myself, I think it's true for both of us, like really do feel like 10 toes in. We have lots of examples of people that we've helped. We have very happy clients calling us back in. Now I would say the last maybe less than 6 months, few months, has been raising our gaze up and seeing who else is on this leading edge, like who else is on this edge, who are the leaders that we are in community with, whether we've acknowledged that before. And so Orna is an example, but and you mentioned Brene Brown, who's been such a sort of visible leader. But Therese and I also pass Esther Perel podcaster out. We kind of have started this unofficial book club. I know I've always been influenced by folks like Parker Palmer, uh, the work of Adrienne Marie Brown, Prentice Hemphill, like, and now suddenly identifying ourselves as at the same table and part of that conversation has been really empowering. And it's also just like open the windows and the doors wide open to influence, to really benevolent influence, you know? So it'll be a good question to ask in the next podcast, because I feel like we'll have even more names.
Before we log off here, another question comes to mind that I want to make sure I ask before it floats out of my head, which is that, has your perspective since becoming a leader of your own organization changed as you work with leaders, rising leaders, aspiring leaders in other organizations?
Absolutely. Unequivocally, unarguably. I'll give you one example. When you, hopefully not letting this turn into some sort of like paternalism, but when you feel responsible for the gainful employment of others downstream of you, when you are recognizing that you're doing your job and doing it well has a direct impact on people's ability to pay their kids' tuition, their healthcare cost. Like, I have now grown sensitive to all that is in the room with a leader that is invisible, all that they are carrying. I can almost now feel what's on their shoulders in a way that I would have never been able to as a freelance actor popping into a boardroom. I suddenly now am like, even though you may not name the fact that taxes have gone up, or this support you were expecting is not here, or the timeline has been crunched, that is in the room with you. Because if you're good at what you do, you feel accountable, you feel responsible for your team. And so I've grown in sensitivity to that. And I think it helps me become a better partner to those leaders, because I hope that they can hear in the way that I'm relating to them that is present for me, whether or not they name it or whether it's visible. It's present to me, all that's in your wake as a leader.
I wonder if Tell Me More would be a good title for this podcast.
Or Pass the Mic. Also, she said pass the mic earlier.
Or pass the mic. Both of those would be good. I have no cheeky sign off. This was very informative and above all enjoyable for me. So thanks, y'all.
For me too. Let's do it again sometime.